Okay, we'll begin. Meeting for the North Wilkesboro Board of Town Commissioners is now in session. Please rise. Bow your heads in prayer, please. Father, thank you for every seat that has been filled here today, for each mind and heart that fills the presence of this room. We thank you. Only you truly know what we are setting out to accomplish today. We have an idea, a vision, hints, and daily instructions. We have talents, abilities, and time to work. However, only you can see in the perfect detail the end of every beginning, every project, every season, every life. Nothing is ever in vain. Free mistakes and missteps are used for good. Your righteousness transcends all our efforts and understanding. Forgive us for our pride, the pride that puffs us up and the pride that threatens to unqualify us. Strengthen our confidence in you who have made us to be. Set us free from comparison in order to work together efficiently. Bless this meeting today, all those present, as well as the lives of those we will encounter afterward, ready to make us in every moment count. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Chief Goldberg, would you please lead us to the pledge of allegiance?
Of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, regarding the agenda, any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to, for Jay, I'd like to put in our council resolution. And when we get to that point, we'll pass the council resolution out. Everybody reading, we'll talk about it.
Or,
Then Jay.
okay.
Then
Also, Mr. Mayor, would like to add what would actually end up being section 10, item I, concerning appointment of the mayor pro tem for the coming term.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parsons. Thank you, Mr. Church. Anyone have anything else? You need a motion on the, I need a motion to accept the additions to the agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to accept the agenda as is.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Do I have a second? Aye. Mr. Hall, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? And then we have the approval of the agenda. We have, this is the general public comment period. We have one here, Mr. Hutchinson, and just a quick review of the rules. There's only one speaker, but speakers are limited to a maximum of 5 minutes. Please don't speak unless you've been called on or recognized. Remember our Sunday best manners and treat each other with respect. And so now we've got all those pleasantries out of the way.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, if we have any extra slots, I'd like to offer the folks who are viewing online the opportunity. And so if you're viewing online and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand virtually and we'll acknowledge you when the time comes.
We'll go ahead then with Mr. Hutchinson.
Dan.
And where you're comfortable, probably a little further, we can hear you.
Mr. Hutchinson, chair.
Yeah.
I can stand. And it is. My name is Pam Hutchinson, and I live down 268 toward Elkin. It's past the city limit. It's in the ETJ. And have some property there. It's zoned highway business. I'd like to consider mixed use zoning so that I can have a part of a building for residential. That's basically what I want to say.
Okay. We're going to need his.
Can I ask?
Yes.
I know we normally don't
No,
come in, but
no.
have you submitted this request to our planning board, to our planning director and to the planning board? Because that's kind of where this process starts, is submitting it's basically a text amendment or a a request to our planner, and then it goes through the planning board before it comes to us. Have you started that process?
No, sir.
If you'll, sir, if you'll leave your information with the clerk, we'll have her reach out to you and walk you through the process. Okay.
Came in to see Meredith.
Okay, so
That's kind of-
she's aware of your
She has
request?
seen- Yes.
Okay. Yes, sir. We'll work on that, follow up with you all on the details of this request.
So, I just mentioned that, in response, Mr. Parsons, that, Ms. Betts said that the board would need to make a resolution to allow this kind of zoning because it's not presently allowed.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Anybody else have any questions for him? Also,
Okay, Mayor, we got Mr. Gary Ganesh online who'd like to speak.
Mr.
So
Ganesh, go ahead.
let me promote him here. Mr. Ganesh, unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Are you able to hear me now? Okay. I have a question, the ongoing dispute with the homeless shelter. First question is, and I'll just ask them both and then you can respond now or later. But I'm just curious how much our legal fees have been involved in that lawsuit total. And then related to that, is it true that if we lose that lawsuit, we will also have to pay the other side's legal fees? And just if sometime you could give an estimate of what those legal fees will finally be. And then the second thing, do the restrictions and guidelines for the homeless shelter also apply to like halfway houses? I'm aware of two that are within 2 blocks of my home and they do an excellent job. I'm glad they're there. Our denomination teaches we're to be Jesus in the neighborhood, so I welcome them to be in our community so we can be Jesus in the community too. But my question is, do those restrictions also apply to them because they have similar clientele? They have people who've just been released from prison. They have people coming off drug addictions. And if they don't apply to them, then does that cause you problems with the 14th Amendment, equal protection of the law, which basically is the case that the other side's trying to make? And if that's the case, is there any reason really to pursue any further challenging their lawsuit? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ganesh. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Ganesh? Anyone else? Mr. Hoover?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. Routine business, there's 3 items. The meeting's minutes, the public utilities director job description, the meeting calendar amendment.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull update meeting calendar and talk about that one.
Please.
I think there's some emerging, so if we can vote on the first 2, and vote on that one separately.
Mr. Mayor, I make the motion that we approve items A and B of the routine business.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Day. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Do we do a roll call for that? Since we have
Yes, sir.
one.
Please.
Mr. Church? Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Hall? Aye. Ms. Day?
Aye.
Mr. Parsons?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Okay,
That was item C.
yes, sir. So item C, I haven't gotten a facilitator confirmed yet, although I've got a good lead. And so I was hoping that we could postpone amending the calendar till our next meeting, just in case that lead doesn't come through. That'll still give us enough time to advertise February 11th as our retreat date. But then there was some other calendar items, Mayor, that you were working on with Danny and I
Yes.
today.
Yeah, we're working with the commissioners and Danny and Debbie to add the agenda of planning meetings. And these meetings are going to be held with all commissioners present in this room over here. There will be no votes taken. It is a meeting to plan to place items on the agenda. Very informal. Will be advertised, will be open to the public. If you want to come, but there's not a whole lot going to be happening at the meeting except for any decisions and no vote. And we would like to incorporate those also.
So Mayor, if you could read those dates out and then maybe have another board member make a motion to add those dates to the calendar.
Don't have them handy, you Deb?
Okay, can we just make a motion to table that item until the next meeting, at which point we'll be able to elaborate on it?
Yes.
And I second it.
We'll amend the calendar for both reasons at the next meeting.
Okay, very good. And we need a motion.
So no motion needed for today.
Great. All right. Mr. Hoover, your report.
Yes, sir. Let me take a moment here. Okay, so I wanted to update the board on the status of the pandemic. If you had a chance to watch the governor's press conference today, he mentioned that within the last week, the state has registered an all-time high in the number of cases. So that's over a 2-year pandemic, the all-time high we just achieved in the last week. And yes, it's the less virulent Omicron variant, which for vaccinated and boosted people is usually not much of a threat. But there are still two dangers. The first is it's still a dangerous virus for unvaccinated people. And two, even if a smaller percentage of infected people are hospitalized, the number of people getting the virus is so high that even that small percentage risks overwhelming our hospital system. And so the state is asking, and I'm repeating today for everyone to stay diligent, continue wearing, waiting, and washing, continue isolating if you feel you've been exposed or if you're experiencing symptoms. And if you haven't already, get vaccinated. We live in an area where a small percentage of the total population is vaccinated. And some of us live in homes where young people live who aren't eligible to be vaccinated. And so it's still in the best interest of the community for folks to be vaccinated and be diligent about practicing the 3 Ws. With that said, the CDC this past week came out with revised isolation and quarantine guidelines. And I can't remember the specifics of them off the top of my head, but they are less burdensome than the last set of guidelines. So the last set of guidelines was you need to isolate for up to 10 days. Now it's 5, depending on the circumstances. Correct. And so that's good for us because if we have a staff person out, if they're not experiencing any symptoms, then they can come back after 5 days instead of 10. And so I'm working with the department heads to get that information out with our workforce and with the department heads so that they can use that while managing their people. But I'm also trying to emphasize to them that the same thing I just said to you, that we need to remain diligent. This is still a threat. And I'm hoping that all here will do their part to help stop the spread of the virus and stay diligent with the 3 Ws and with vaccination. So just wanted to share that with you today as an update.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. This brings us to item
Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Wilson, do you have any more update on the grant money for parks?
Yes, sir.
Let us know today.
We've chosen
And who's gonna do it?
We've chosen a vendor, and we're working out the details of the agreement with them. Their initial proposal left out one thing that we wanted, but fortunately it came in under budget. So I think that we'll be able to add that extra thing and still be under budget. But we're working with them on that.
So we should know shortly when they start.
Yes, sir. And it sounds like they're, based on the agreement or the proposal they sent us, they're ready to start pretty much right away.
So, sure. Anyone have any other questions for Mr. Hoover? Okay, consideration of old business. The comprehensive financial policy, Mr. Hoover.
Yes,
Is
sir.
Connie with us?
Sorry?
Is Connie with us?
Oh, yes, and she sure is. I need to promote her. Thank you for that. All right, Connie, I'm going to promote you. Oh, so that's another thing I'll just share with you. So I've committed some of the staff members who are at high risk to participate remotely so that they can avoid large crowds and places where they can't social distance. And so that's why Connie and Meredith and others will be participating virtually tonight. Okay, so the comprehensive financial policy we've worked on for a while. I won't go over every detail, but I'd like to draw your attention to the summary sheet that's attached to your agenda, particularly the highlighted portions, because I think those are, for lack of a better word, the highlights of the policy and probably what you all are most interested in. I included some highlights from each section. And for the benefit of our viewers, this policy covers budgeting guidelines, capital budgeting, debt practices, fund balance practices, and investment practices. So it covers pretty much every significant part of our financial activity in the town. And I can't stress to you all enough how important guidelines and guidance from the elected board like this is to staff when we're putting together the budget and working on other financial pieces for you. And so I hope you'll consider approving it tonight. The one thing that I want to point out that I think is probably of most interest to the board is the fund balance policy. Per your direction and per the guidance from Sharon Edmondson at the LGC, I set it as a range between 65 and 75%. That means that we'll have no less than 3/4 of 1 year's budget in the bank at one time, and probably more. Our most recent audit figures that just came in put our fund balance for the last fiscal year at 94%. So we're 19% over that threshold, which means if you approve this policy, we can use that difference, which equates to about $1.2 million to fund one-time capital projects, settlements, and other expenses that we deem necessary. And I've actually got some ideas that I'll bring to you in the coming weeks on what we can spend that money on. So anyway, Mr. Mayor, that's my quick summary of the comprehensive financial policy. Connie and I are available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Any questions for Connie or Mr. Hoover? Any further discussion? Please go ahead, Andrew. Yeah.
I guess I spoke to Connie earlier on the phone, and my only concern is that debt load of 2.5% or $10 million. It seems like that might be high. A few years ago when the town considered doing the fire department, that came back, the number was going to be several million. That would have tied up the town just paying debt service to that for, many years, 20, 30 years. And Connie, could you speak to that at all?
The best of my memory, the Davenport representatives told us that I think the fire department's quote was between 8 and 9 million, and that would tie the town up for 20 years, and that would be the only project that they would be able to do. We could not afford to pay for anything else extra. The ones that was on the board, they could, when that presentation was given, can correct me if that's not what was said.
I thought that we left that night saying it was $40 million for the everything. It was 40.
Well, that is
40 years was the term.
40 years term,
right,
yes.
right.
And the point, if we built a fire department, it would take all of our money to pay for that over that amount of time.
That would be the yeah,
Police and fire
yeah.
So
together.
just as a comment, Commissioner Palmer and others, so, this isn't a prescription. It doesn't mean we would take out $10 million in debt. It means that we could. And the reason why I set that number, which is admittedly high, when Sharon was here, she said 2% is usually the cap. It's because $10 million is about what we need to borrow if we ever did that. And so at least according to this policy, we have permission to go that high if we chose. But obviously, the best practice would be to borrow far less than that.
I would feel more comfortable with that number being lower after talking with Connie today.
But doesn't mean we're gonna spend it.
We can,
Yeah, we can.
but we
So
don't.
we are healthy enough to spend it if we chose to do it.
That's kind of the debt limit on the credit card.
Right.
Well, this board may not spend it, but in the future, you might have a board that would.
Yeah, but Andrew, what's to stop the next board from just changing the rules? Because it's just a policy. So I mean, this is just a recommendation of debt level without, because this is not tying anybody's feet to the floor. This is just a recommendation. So any board in the future can change the rules to however they see fit, regardless of what we say today. Today, we say as a board, we believe in these principles. And so, but that's one way to look at it.
I understand. I just wanted to state that's more than I was comfortable with, and I did. Thank you.
Then the last thing I'll point out to the board is on the second page of the summary sheet. A small but notable change to our investment policy would be to lower the terms of our investments to no more than 10 years maturity for typical investments and no more than 15 years maturity on hospital investments. And that was advice that Gary, what's his last name? Gary from
Gary Porter.
Yes, from the North Carolina Capital Management Trust gave us.
The LGC also recommends that.
Those are all my comments there.
Anyone else have any questions or discussions, comments before we vote? We don't need a.
I make,
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Mayor,
sorry.
I make a motion to accept the comprehensive financial report policies.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. Now for the vote, Mr. Church,
Aye.
Mr. Hall, Ms. Day,
Aye.
Mr. Parsons, Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Connie.
Brings us to item E, traffic calming updates. Mr. Hoover, Chief Thornburg, and Ms. Cameron.
Okay, I'm gonna promote Mary Elizabeth Campbell because we're gonna throw her into the deep end tonight and ask her to make a presentation on the results of our traffic calming study. As you'll see momentarily, we held two experiments. One was to test the effectiveness of speed bumps on Finley Avenue. The other was to test the effectiveness of lane narrowing and intersection realignment on 6th Street. And so Mary Elizabeth will talk about the results of those, and then we'll talk about some of the ideas we have for next steps. So Mary Elizabeth, let me make you co-host so that you can share your PowerPoint and then take it away.
Okay. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. Okay, so as Wilson said, I'm going to be talking to y'all about the traffic calming study that has been ongoing for the past few months. And so really the purpose of this study is to reduce traffic speeds and volumes, and also to identify the most effective and cost-efficient traffic calming tools. So first we looked at speed bumps on Finley Avenue. And you can see on this map, you can see this is where the radar sign collected westbound speeds. And
Slide didn't change, so you might need to share the slides, but we're still looking at the first slide.
oh, can you see it now?
There you go.
You can see it now? Okay. Great. So like I said, we tested the effect of speed bumps on Finley Avenue on traffic speeds and volumes. And so here you can see the red square is the radar speed sign that tested or collected westbound traffic speeds. And these yellow points are the speed bumps. So we collected speed data before speed bumps were installed in early July. And then in late October, we collected data after the speed bumps were installed. And when we analyzed the results, we controlled for weekdays and daylight hours. Do you see the next slide?
Go ahead.
Yes?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So what we found that 91% fewer drivers sped. So before 36% of drivers were speeding, and that number was cut down to around 8%. We found average speeds lowered by roughly 32%. So we cut that number down from 27.6 to 18.8. We reduced the 85th percentile speed by 30%. And that is the speed at which 85% of drivers are going or slower. And that statistic is significant because it is what NCDOT uses to measure whether an area qualifies for traffic calming. Vehicle count increased by 6%, which actually isn't concerning. We would be more concerned if there was a significant decrease in vehicle volume, because that could indicate that drivers were taking other routes and potentially creating traffic calming challenges elsewhere in the neighborhood. And we also saw a slight peak speed reduction from 39.9 to 39.2 miles per hour. So our next study was testing the effect of, So our Finley Avenue speed bumps effective traffic calming. Well, 91% fewer drivers speeding, 32% lower speeds, most drivers 30% slower, and 2% lower peak speeds. So we're planning on adding 2 more sets of speed bumps along Finley Avenue, and you can see those are marked by the blue sets of circles. All right. Our next study was on 6th Street, and we looked at both an intersection realignment and lane narrowing. So at the intersection of Finley, Hinshaw, and 6th, we worked on placing a 4-way stop and squaring the curb in order to improve, to clarify driver right-of-way and the traffic pattern, and also scoring the curb slows down traffic turning off Finley from 6th Street. But what we really tested for reducing speeds and as a traffic calming measure was the effect of the bike lane narrowing the lane. And so we collected pre-treatment data in late August, early September, and post-treatment data after the lane was striped in late September. So we found a marginal increase in average and 85th percentile speeds. And unfortunately, the ratio of drivers speeding remained about the same. Vehicle count also remained the same. So it is good that we didn't see a significant decrease, because that could indicate that drivers were using potentially other neighborhood roads. So if we're looking at the effect of speed bumps and the intersection realignment, we can see that speed bumps had a large effect on the ratio of drivers speeding to drivers going at safe speeds, the average speed of drivers, and the 85th percentile speed. And so next, what we want to look at is 6th Street is adding an element of lane narrowing that both physically narrows the lane and is a vertical element of narrowing, because we found with the bike lane narrowing, it didn't physically narrow the lane and cars were still able to traverse over the restriped lane. And any questions?
Can I ask one? Why don't they just move that stop sign up from coming up by community grocery so you can see around the corner and get rid of that other nest at the top of the hill? Put a speed bump at the top of Sixth Street so you slow down as you go down. Put one on the bottom of Sixth Street as you start to come up to slow it down and get rid of that intersection.
So the intersection works and we want to keep that because it clarifies right away and makes it easier to navigate whose turn it is at that intersection. But as for the speed bumps, I actually think that's a pretty good idea. You know, the speed bumps on Finley Avenue have been so successful that I think they might be worth trying on Sixth Street as well. Now, one of the challenges with Sixth Street is that it's steeply graded, and typically speed bumps aren't meant to be used on a grade that steep, but it's a 1% difference. So I was reviewing the technical material. They suggested that you don't use those on grades more than 8%, and that road's 9%, so it's close. And then the other mitigating factor is that the speed bumps that we're using are not your typical speed bumps. They're a little bit shorter, and so even though they make a kathunk and make you slow down, they probably won't launch a car in the air like a 8-inch speed bump would. So after their success on Finley Avenue, I think that's a traffic calming measure worth trying on Sixth Street.
And I agree with you. I think we ought to have another one on Finley Avenue and put a speed bump at the bottom of Sixth Street and right there.
We'll have to do a little more work to figure out the optimal placement for them on Sixth Street, because they have to be a certain number of feet from driveways and so forth. But you know, we started working on that, and we got an idea about where they go. So we'd like to try that next, and of course, take measurements and see if they have the same effect there that they have on Finley.
Can we put another one on Finley?
Yes, sir.
Without doing any measure or anything?
Yeah, we know exactly where our new ones on Finley are going to go. We've actually already bought it, and so those can be installed within days.
Sounds good to me.
And then the other thing is that we want to hold a community meeting first week of February to receive community input on future traffic measures. These ones that we've been doing, of course, are what I call starter projects. They use the speed bumps are removable. The one Mary Elizabeth showed there was used bollards that are removable. And we're doing those to test the effectiveness, but you know, ultimately, if these work, you want to make fixed improvements to the road. But that's a big investment, and of course, it would affect people's commuting patterns and so forth. And so we want to get the community's thoughts on those before we consider investing in those. So we've been planning a public meeting for the first week of February, and we'd like to hold that, combine the information we gleaned from that meeting with the data that we've been collecting, and bring that back to you in the future when we're considering which traffic calming measures to put in place.
I would still like to hear EMS and fire departments take home response times, considering these traffic calming measures.
Yes, sir.
They don't.
So I'll just share with you my, and I do think it's important to bring them in. Jimmy couldn't be here today. He had some illness in his family, but essentially the speed bumps have no effect on fire trucks and ambulances because they're so small, the big trucks go right over. Stop signs would have a nominal impact on their response time. But you know, our guys and gals do what they need to do. And so if they need to roll through the stop sign to get to the call, if it's safe, they will. The thing that they don't want are speed tables, which are the ones that have the flat top, because those are the ones that really slow the big trucks down, and can bottom them out and so forth. So, but I'll get them to come and share with you directly, Commissioner Parsons, before we make any big investments.
Any other questions for Mr. Hooper or comments?
So we have one public participant who'd like to make a comment, Mayor, if that's okay with you. Ms. Phillips?
Go ahead.
All right, let me promote her here. Greetings, Ms. Phillips. Unmute yourself. The floor is yours. Ms. Phillips, you're still muted.
Okay, sorry. I hope you don't see I hope you don't see my face. Thank you, guys. I am so thrilled to see that maybe you're realizing the impact of this massive traffic on 6th Street and the possibility of putting some bumps or the things that you showed Mary Elizabeth in the middle of the street. We are thrilled that we've got to this point. And I so appreciate it and hope we can carry this through. I think most of us on the committee that we have together on Facebook think that diverting the traffic is a solution, since the police department absolutely cannot monitor all this. If we get the traffic off of this street by means of the bumps, great. We don't need to depend on the police department. And I appreciate it. We've worked hard on this, and I appreciate y'all for remembering us and keeping us on the forefront. Thanks, Mary Elizabeth.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Anyone have any questions for her? Anyone else, Mr. Hooper?
Mary Elizabeth, any last comments?
Are we still talking about traffic?
Yes, sir.
I'm concerned is the speed bump going to be the new standard for any street that's having traffic problems? Are we going to have speed bumps throughout North Wilkesboro now? I mean, what does this mean for us in the future?
So one of the things that Mary Elizabeth's working on that we'll bring back to you all in the future is guidelines for when a street would be eligible for traffic calming. And that'll be things like volumes, speeds, and so forth. And it'll essentially say that if you got a traffic calming issue you think on your street, come to us, we'll collect that information, and we'll decide whether or not it qualifies for traffic calming. And then if it does, we'll review the information and see which traffic calming measure is most appropriate for that area, if one is needed at all. The Manual of Uniform Traffic Calming Devices has some sort of scientific guidelines for speed bumps that we need to meet. And they're not appropriate in every application. And so that would be the standard, but they are, as you've seen, effective. And so I suspect that's the one we'll be investigating the most.
I don't want to pontificate, but like I've said from the beginning, I can't support the speed bumps, and I just think they're invasive to the community. And if anybody in the public's out there listening to me, please direct your comments to the others on that. I'm joking, but anyway, I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Anyone else?
I'd like to say that before Andrew's gone, having read what you put in our packet, when yield and stop signs are used, I see what you have been talking about, Wilson, in that DOT is not a fan of stop signs, yield signs, and things like that. So I feel like the speed bumps are going to be a positive. Now, that doesn't mean we have to have 40 in the town. We know where the issues are in speeding, and we need to target those issues. This is not something we're going to go around and do for everybody. So I just want to put a good word in that after reading what Wilson had put in our package, I certainly see why DOT constantly say no stop signs for vehicles. We're going to have to be on our very, very vigilant before they're going to clap.
I'll say this, that Anyone else?
I got one comment, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Out on the DOT road, which is Main Street, North Wilkesboro, we have excessive speeding bumps. We cannot put speed bumps on Main Street. We need to figure out something to do on Main Street pretty quickly before we get somebody killed.
Yes, sir.
Basically, the old ladies.
We got some things in the works that we're gonna test out and that'll be the next road we tackle. Yes, sir.
And I'm in full agreement with Otis on that. We both sit there and watch cars and trucks and fishing boats. Honestly, it's just, that is when we name 6th Street, we name 8th Street, I name Main Street. Because that's where people are putting their feet to the asphalt most. So speeding there is my biggest concern with those 3 areas.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree. I support what they're saying. It's dangerous.
Anything else regarding traffic? Item F, law enforcement compensation.
Thank you, Mary Elizabeth.
Sir?
I said, thank you, Mary Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. Law enforcement compensation, Mr. Hoover.
Yes, sir. So I've got some additional information to pass out here. In your package, I sent out, as attachment number 3, 4 scenarios for compensation adjustments. But I've got an updated version of that based on conversations that I had with the mayor that gives them alternative scenario. It sounds like, Mayor, that based on your conversations with the board is most intrigued with scenario 1.
Yes.
And so I've created alternative scenario 1, which turns the dial on one of the sort of assumptions that I made to make this more affordable. So in the first scenario 1, we adjust the law enforcement compensation $5,000 across the board right away. And then at the end of June, when we roll over into the new fiscal year and other county employees got a cost of living adjustment, the law enforcement employees would not receive that for 1 year. So they'd receive their compensation adjustment right away, and that's what would carry them until July of next year. And the total for that would be $122,014. However, the mayor inquired about what it would cost to give them an adjustment now and the 2.5 cost of living adjustment at the end of the fiscal year. And that raises the price tag about $29,000. So the total cost of that would be $151,000.
And you're making an assumption that the goal is going to be 2.5.
Yes, sir. Right. So those are the 2 sort of scenarios around a $5,000 adjustment. What we would do then is give that adjustment to each eligible employee and then adjust the pay ranges, the top and bottom end of the pay ranges by that much. So essentially everyone would stay static in terms of where they are in relation to the pay range, but their salary would be that much higher. That makes us a little bit better than Wilkesboro and a lot better than the other neighboring municipalities around us. We still lag behind the county, but if you refer to attachment 2, you'll see that they're just in another ballpark. It would cost millions to catch up with them. And so the proposal as it stands would make us very competitive with other municipalities.
Wilson, do you have factored in the fact that the Wilkesboro Police Department also receives family health care in their package versus ours only receive single coverage?
No, sir. They remain more competitive than us in that front.
You have an estimate of what that difference in the package is between our officers and theirs?
Mary Elizabeth, I think you had that information, right? I think it was about a $15,000 difference per employee who, yes, who accepts.
An additional 15,000.
Yeah, is that right, Ralph? Okay.
Yes, roughly 15,000.
So in essence, to me, looking at these, if we're not really compensating our officers to match Wilkesboro. I mean, yes, on base salary, I understand that, but if you're looking at the total package, we're still losing that game to Wilkesboro. And in my opinion, significantly, because a young officer coming on board, that family coverage versus single coverage, because if he's going to have to cover his family, that's actually going to come out of the salary that we are paying him. So to me, that seems like a negative difference when you look at it in those terms. Am I thinking along the right lines?
But as an employee, say, in a water department or whatever other departments, if I was in those departments, I would want those same benefits that you just went through. Family dental, we're gonna look at Wilkesboro, they're doing it. I don't think we can pull just one department for healthcare and dental and.
That's not what I meant by that. And
No,
that's,
but-
but I'm just saying, I don't want to sugarcoat something by saying we're gonna invest this much money, thinking that we're going to solve our retention problems by saying, okay, we're just going to increase their salary, because ultimately we're losing these employees because the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. And so all I'm saying is that if we're going to look at trying to keep Rob's officers Chief Thornburg's officers in his department and staying with this town, then, you have to look at the big picture of how are we competing in that marketplace.
Yes, sir. And when we review the compensation on an organizational level, that's one of the parts of it. Connie just texted me and said she doesn't think Wilkesboro offers retiree insurance. So that's one area that we provide that they did.
Okay, well, see, I think to me, to have all those numbers in place,
They did get retirees.
And let's see what the reality is.
Yeah.
We're not looking at true reality.
say that again, Chief.
They did get retirees insurance. Chief Garrett just retired and he stayed the full 30 over there, so he did his retirement. Or his insurance.
I mean, I don't mean to make it be difficult. I believe in our police department, but I also believe in our town employees. I just want to make sure that if we as a town are going to take on this extra budget notation, that we're going to get what we're ultimately after, which is employment opportunities and retention. So I don't want to put a Band-Aid on a gash if it's not going to really solve the problem. That's just my thought.
Connie, can I promote you and you share your information that you shared with me about the marketplace?
While we're waiting on Connie, can I speak? To Michael's point, I agree with what Michael is saying, but on the other hand, if we were slightly above Wilkesboro in salary, if you had an officer who didn't have a family, that might bring them here. If you had an officer that their spouse had family insurance, they may still come here if the money was better. I also think that regardless of, in comparison to Wilkesboro, when you look at us, it looks to me like our pay is lower than the competition. And I just in general feel like we need to look at that across the board for our whole town. But I think with the police thing, we need to do what we can.
Connie, go ahead with the marketplace information.
The several years ago, our insurance broker recommended that we did not offer spouse coverage due to, if the employer does not offer it, it gives the opportunity to the spouse to go to the marketplace and get much more affordable insurance coverage. We offered spouse coverage, but nobody took it because it was unaffordable. And as long as we offered it, they wouldn't qualify at the marketplace.
But just to clarify, Connie, that was spouse coverage that the employees paid a monthly premium and so forth on, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
I think that, Mr. Parsons and Mr. Palmer's points are both well taken. And as we move on, more detail, we're going to be splitting hairs because I know, Chief, I know all 26 of your full-time officers. Is that number correct, 26?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's
About.
full staff.
Okay, well then 100% of them are not taking advantage of the insurance.
None of them are. It's too expensive.
I know there's some younger guys that had to come marry their wives, cover the family that way.
Yes,
So,
so that's
I'm
not
sorry.
my wife covers our son. because it's
Okay.
so large. My main goal,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
my main goal is to, we're at this pay, we're not going to recruit from other departments. My main goal is to recruit new recruits from schools and maintain these recruits. If they get married, hopefully their wives will have jobs and they will have the insurance through their employer. And we can maintain these employees instead of them staying 2 or 3 years and moving to another county. The officer that went to Watauga, he said, if I made $5,000 more a year, I'd stay. Because a $5,000 raise wouldn't have been worth for me to drive up the mountain. I would have stayed here. So we would have maintained that employee here, and we would have maintained our investment in that officer here and kept him. So we would have had longevity with that officer. So that's my goal here with this. Not to headhunt from other departments.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, can I say something?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead, Mr. Sturge.
We can stand here and scenario ourselves to death.
You're right.
What we can do here, what we need to do right now is make a decision on giving them guys the money. It will open up some cans of worms, I understand that. But I think this is scenario number 2 is what we need to go with. And I make a motion that we do scenario number 2.
Excuse me, Commissioner, do you mean alternative scenario 1?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, the one I handed out today.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the last 2 other comments I wanted to make. So where the money's gonna come from. So Rob made this a whole lot easier by offering to give 2 positions of his that have been vacant for a while up and apply those already budgeted salaries to pay for this increase. And that means that, our fully staffed number will go from 26 to 24. But that's a trade-off that Rob's willing to make. So that's my proposal on how to pay for it. And then the last thing I'll say, Commissioner Church, is that because this requires a change to the personnel policy, we're required to put this out for employee comment. So we can't actually vote to change the policy and give the pay raises today. So what I recommended to the mayor is that if the board is interested in taking action, that you consider approving this resolution, which states your intention and directs staff to begin the process of taking the steps that we're administratively required to take to make this happen. And once this, and I've listed on this resolution the 4 changes to the personnel policy that are required. And we'll put that out for employee comment period and bring this back at the next meeting for an official vote.
On the 27th.
On the 27th.
Yes, sir.
Should this be good?
Yes, sir.
Resolution 2022-01, directing actions to adjust compensation for law enforcement officers. Whereas the North Wilkesboro Board of Commissioners has identified pay disparities between law enforcement officers employed by the town and those of neighboring agencies. And whereas the board wishes to remedy these disparities and enhance the town's ability to recruit and retain law enforcement officers by amending its pay plan and raising salaries. Now therefore be it resolved, the Board of Commissioners of the town of North Wilkesboro do hereby direct the town manager to initiate all legally and administratively required steps to make happen the following actions. Number one, strike Article 3, Section 3 from the personnel policy. Employees shall now be hired at the hiring rate for their classification. Two, according to Article 3, Section 2, adjust the minimum and maximum pay for all law enforcement classifications according to the terms as outlined by the Board of Commissioners in Appendix 1. 3, adjust the salaries of all North Wilkesboro Police Department employees according to the eligibility criteria and procedures as outlined in Article 3, Section 9 and 10 of the personnel policy. Number 4, add Article 3, Section 18, reading flexibility with hourly wage for part-time employees, seasonal employees or employees, that's non-law enforcement, who work less than 1,560 hours per year may be paid up to $13 per hour at the discretion of their hiring department head. Law enforcement meeting the same qualifications may be paid up to $15 an hour. For part-time employees with exceptionally unique skill sets, department heads may offer more than $15 per hour with the concurrence of the town manager. This flexibility is needed to more fairly compensate exceptional or seasoned employees, compete for more qualified employees, and retain employees searching for employment elsewhere. Departments must manage the extra costs within their approved budgets.
Wilson, I have a question on that last line of that.
Yes, sir.
So,
Me too.
let's manage the extra costs within their approved budgets. That budget is set at the beginning of our fiscal year every June. So how would they adjust that budget process during the middle of the year if they felt that they were having, that they needed to financially compensate their employees? Where would they find that within their budget?
Well, for example, if they had a full-time vacancy and they wanted to pay a part-time person with that full-time vacancy, that would be an example of a time that they could use that. And then other folks, for example, seasonal employees, other part-time employees, the department head might determine that they can make do with one less person if the others are compensated a little more. So perhaps the crews have 7 instead of 8 people, and the 7 people get paid a little bit more than they would if they were an 8 person. So those are just a few examples of what I mean by managing within the term budget. And that's why this is for part-time only. You'd never let a department head do this with a full-time person. Because clearly if they tried to hire a full-time person with unbudgeted money, that full-time person wouldn't last very long. Because the fiscal year would expire and they'd be back to square one.
Wilson, did you already go through this same question just a few months ago and got feedback from the town employees on that particular part of that statement he just read about the part-time pay? And we voted to do that? Is this the same thing?
It's the same thing. We brought it back because we thought it complemented this this pay adjustment. And staff thinks it's important to help us recruit and retain.
It seems odd that it got slipped in there and there was no discussion about it. I don't like that.
Well, if we've already discussed this, well, I wouldn't hear, then why should we do this? If we've already agreed to this on a previous meeting, then why should we do it again? That don't make sense.
If we raise the, for the same reasons, if we don't raise this pay, we risk losing some of the valuable part-time members that we have. And the police department is the department that uses part-time folks. And so we want to make sure that they are compensated fairly along with their full-time colleagues. Rob, can you talk a little bit about
I'll
that?
just give you a prime example. If we need to hire a
part-time IT person.
Okay.
A part-time IT person is not gonna come in for $13 an hour.
You're right.
He is not gonna come in for $15 an hour. Okay, we may have to negotiate $30 an hour. We may, I mean, it will be a negotiation process on a part-time pay, but if I'm limited to $13 or $15 an hour, someone who has a degree in IT work is not gonna come in for that pay. We have to have that little bit of flexibility there for that. That's why it says that specialized skill set for that. And that was not in that previous,
Oh, it was not.
it was not in that previous thing. That was just for lifeguards, I think.
But in the previous thing, we sent it out to staff and we got a bunch of feedback from people that basically said that if we do that, you'll have part-time new people coming in, getting paid more than people that have been there for 10 years. And that's why we decided not to do it.
But these will be part-time people with like IT degrees and things like that.
Yeah, but I think this is across all departments, is it not?
It was not all departments, just. It's no problem.
I don't like this. I think we were talking about the police thing. This should have been focused on that. I'm not going to be able to support this resolution with that on there. I just don't like the way it's happening.
I don't think we need this. If we've already discussed it and already done it, we can go ahead and give them a raise and not do this part.
Well, you don't have to pass the resolution, that's true, but the changes to the personnel policy can't be voted on tonight because we haven't had that employee comment period yet.
Well, can we make a motion to remove? Can I make a motion to remove that?
Done this ahead of time and had it here, so tonight we could give them a raise without bringing in more stuff. What we do, we keep delaying things over a period of a year, like we worked on the speed for a year and a half. Now we're gonna work on this pay raise for a year and a half. I don't understand what we're doing. We're not doing the job we
We're
were
getting
paid
the
to do.
details about what the actual raise is gonna be. There were no specifics before. The board has agreed to specifics tonight, and that's what the employees are entitled to comment on. And so we'll be able to bring this back for final approval at the next one.
Mr. Hoover, I have a question, please.
Yes, sir.
This section 4, can that be made specific to law enforcement?
That's up to the board, yes, sir.
Any questions, discussion, comments on that?
Well, I think there will definitely be some feedback by employees outside of the police department.
Sure they will.
I'd like, I'd like to hear those if they have one.
Oh, you will. But I think that to move forward again and not incur an additional delay, I think the board do what the board wants to do, but I do think that moving forward, in this case, for the vote on the 27th should be law enforcement specific.
I don't want to make this too big of a deal, but just if I recollect, I mean, we spoke about this at a couple meetings, went through this whole process, and it was this thing and there was discussion. Tonight, we had a resolution brought to us that was about something else that has it slid in there. And it just, I haven't heard anything about this till the resolution was read. If I wasn't paying attention, I wouldn't have known it was in there. And I don't like how it happened. I don't like that.
I don't think so. Let's take it out and reapproach.
So again,
Take that part out.
Yeah, we can make the raises for the full-time folks happen with just numbers 1, 2, 3.
Just take the part-time stuff out.
okay, because there, well, keep in mind what this is, your decision.
Let's just take the part-time stuff
Okay.
out for now. We'll revisit that later.
Okay, you're driving that ship, so. Yeah,
That
that's
was-
right.
All that was put in today.
Okay,
Robert, you just mentioned by you taking the one on the chin about eliminating your assistant chief and your lead detective, how much money you are providing towards this budgetary number? Do you have that approximate, what those two salaries and compensations would have been? Because I know you're taking one for the team by eliminating those two positions. So do you have that number so we can just kind of see what the offset is between the? You have that, Wilson?
Yes, sir. It's about 100,000 for the assistant chief and about 59,000 for the investigator. And that's an all-in figure. That's their salary.
Right, so
And
so
so
that's,
Between the two, that's all.
it's a wash.
Yeah, it'd be a wash.
And that's what, and that's a way to look at it going forward is, because you've got the budget next year, the budget following that, and then, so where does that money come from? Well, by you taking one for the team, by using your team members to pay for it, I think that is more than fair. I think that's more than fair.
Just as a comment that if he ever wants to have that position back, he can request that through the normal budget process and we would consider it.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Anything else on law enforcement?
So I don't need the resolution, but if y'all want to take action, just so it'll be recorded, you can pass the resolution with just items 1, 2, and 3, or you can just give a head nod to staff and we'll advertise as I described without a formal action.
Well, for the record, and to keep it straight and to be a record of that, what we do. I'd recommend, if anybody would care to make a motion, that we accept this resolution, just items 1 through 3.
So moved.
Second,
Okay, go ahead and do the poll. Mr. Church?
No.
Ms. Day?
aye.
Mr. Parsons?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Motion carries.
You do it next time.
So it's not something that can't be done. Consideration of new business, Christmas lights, Mr. Hoover's Christmas lights.
She is not with us. She had a personal appointment that was long scheduled, so I'm going to be giving this briefing tonight, but I confess that she knows more about it than I do, so we might have some follow-up that we need to perform for you. Find the PowerPoint presentation here. Okay. So this was an item that the commission asked to hear about a few weeks ago at our first agenda setting meeting. And it's a timely matter because, as you can imagine, Christmas lights go on sale in January. And so if we want to update some of our inventory, now's the time to do it. But first, a review of that inventory. You can see here that we use 4 different styles of lights on different blocks. And, some people might like having uniformity throughout downtown, but I kind of like having a little variety. Some of them are quite a few years old, the angels pictured there, but they have been recently updated with LED lights, so they are more efficient and maintained, so they should last a fair amount longer. The reason why we don't have lights on the poles on the 900 block of Main Street is because there are no adequate poles there. And as you can see from the next slide, the poles there are of the decorative variety. 14 of them are the old style lights with what we call the acorn bulb. And the 2 here closest to downtown or closest to town hall and Michael's shop are the new style lights. And so that does limit the type of light you can hang on that block. What we have been doing on the 900 block is installing lights in the tree branches. We tried balls last year. We got some of the colorful balls, and they either fell down and broke, couldn't be seen, or were stolen. So those turned out to not be a good choice. So there are some possibilities for the 900 block there, and they're pictured here. And so I'll just keep going. Option 1 is the poinsettia. They weigh about 23 pounds. And this quote here that we've got is straight from the salesperson from Moscow, which is the company we buy these from. And you can see we can buy enough of those to cover the poles for about $7,100.
Can I open my mouth again?
Why not? Why not? Go ahead.
When you buy these things, would you please, whoever buys them, go in the dark and light them up to see what they look like when they're dark? Because those wreaths on Main Street stink because nobody paid any attention that you can't see them. And nobody paid any attention to how they actually look when it's dark.
There's no lights in it.
There is lights in them.
No, you can't see much. That's the point, yeah.
See how these things light up in the dark? Don't just buy them from a
They
catalog.
have like a blue color to them. I don't know, do y'all see that?
That's probably the LED. Yeah.
Can they be a normal color LED?
So when you purchase them, you've got the option of buying them with the traditional incandescent lights and the LED lights. And I imagine that the traditional lights are, white
So
more.
we're using LED and it makes it look a
So the
little bit
quotes-
bluer.
Yeah, the quotes here are for LEDs, but if we wanted to buy these for, with incandescent, I'm not sure all of them are available with the traditional bulbs, but I know some of them are, and that actually lowers the price a little bit. Though they don't last as long. Okay, the second option is snowflake, is pictured here. We can get a sufficient amount of those for $6,200. And then finally, option 3 are the wreaths, complete with the bows. And these look like that. So it depends on whether you want to buy them with lights or without. You might not need lights on these since they go over the top of the bulb. They might be lit by that. And obviously the lit ones or the unlit ones are much more affordable. So then finally, just to go over some other considerations to think about. Another challenge, of course, with 9th Street is the presence of power. Not all of the poles are built in a way that you can use the power from the pole itself. You've got to plug into little junction boxes like we have right outside this door that are in the pavement. And some of the trees on the 900 block are close to those, and some of them aren't. We also have to get permission from Duke Energy because they own the poles. They're very accommodating on their other larger poles, but we don't know how accommodating they be of the more expensive decorative poles on the 900 block. And of course, this was an unbudgeted item. And so although we probably can find a little bit of money to spend on this, we have to take it away from something else. And so the money matter is a concern as well. So we're ready to receive the board's feedback.
Wilson.
Go ahead, Andrews.
I've got a couple notes here. One thing too, on that website for that group that makes that, they sell garland, and I think it's priced at like $84 or something without the discount per pole. And you probably need that to run the cable up to it and hide it, although you don't have to. I think we need to buy the lighted wreaths with lights because, well, first of all, I should say I like option 3, but I like the lights because that's the whole point. We're trying to light up town. And also, I was down there and counted the poles with Crystal, and I think she counted all the poles from like 9th Street down. So there's like 4 poles right there at the intersection of Main and 9th, and it would get the 2 like in front of Michael's Jewelry and the one at the Blair Properties, but it wouldn't get the one in front of Town Hall and the dispensary. And I think we should consider those also. I guess that's my thoughts.
The corner of 800 block too.
Yeah, just those 2, so that would be, cohesive.
Yes, sir.
And you have those old style lights on those corners also.
On each corner, on
Gotcha,
the
yeah.
4-way stop, there's lights on each corner.
I got you.
I am more for the traditional. Some of these things, the snowflakes, the poinsettias, all that, it's a little cheesy, but maybe that's what our children and kids want at Christmas time. think we need to kind of put that thought there. I do like what Andrew's come up with the wreaths around the lights. I think we probably do need the garlands. And maybe that is part of the section that we use for new lighting. Because I can't imagine, were we looking at doing other things besides that area, starting at Michael's and going down to,
At least start at Penalty Square or whatever it's called now, come all the way through town and you've got lights that go out D Street and, you know.
we'll be using our current
We need
lights,
to come all the way through town.
with the ones with
But
the,
when people comes in
but we don't have
town,
the lanterns. So
Yeah.
halfway through town, we're gonna have to have something hanging on the main poles.
Right.
Then we switch over to the new look of what would be number 3 in our packet. I like number 3 too.
me too.
One thing Andrew and I have discussed is at some point, and I talked to the mayor about this today as well, I would like to see us try to reach out to our community, the people that live in North Wilkesboro, and see if they're interested in maybe having some kind of committee instead of Crystal having to bring it to us. Certainly, we'd like to have a final look, I'm sure, but I'd like to see people be involved in that and picking them and working with maybe a team of people who want to do the beautification at night, be interested in working with as a team.
So are you referring just to Christmas beautification?
No, I think it's the same people, we could carry it over to, our plantings
Mhm.
and our flower beds and things like that. I just think, we have some very smart people who know their flowers, they know their trees. They're excellent yards that might be interested in participating in both the summer and spring with flowers and, then maybe a team for the Christmas season.
Yes, ma'am, we can work on that.
And we may not get a one hand's raise to do it. But I think it'd be a great way to bring people into town and make them feel like they're a part of something special. Because our downtown, and we all know this, our light up downtown is pretty amazing. It is the best thing we do as a town, as an event. And so, we want to keep that going.
All right, so yes, ma'am, we can work on that. So what I'm hearing is that there's agreement on option 3. Do we want the lit or the unlit?
The more lights, the better.
The lit, okay. And we want to add a couple so that they can be on all 4 corners of the ninth and Main Street intersection.
And what we gonna put on the other one?
What about the lights that we have now, the wreaths? Can we switch around and do angels up that way and turn around and put the wreaths somewhere else? I mean, they're still good wreaths.
Could we sell them to somebody?
Wait, what wreaths are we talking about?
If we moved, we will have new decorations down here on the end, but what are we gonna do with the old above, is what we're talking about.
Well, there's,
Angels.
there was, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. There's like a delay. Oh, well, see, there's, coming down Main Street, they had the wreaths on the big poles, but from, 9th Street down, there wasn't anything. And there was no lights in the trees this year. I also think we need, first of all, I support doing some sort of beautification committee that would be a commissioner or two and citizens that could oversee things like Angela talked about. But also there needs to be a plan so that if we're going to put lights in trees, they need to be trimmed in time to do it. But when I went down after the light up, there was no lights from there down. And then Crystal went back and put lights at the bottom of the trees. So there wouldn't be anything left over to sell. You would still have your big ones on the tall poles, and these would just go in those smaller, like lantern style poles. Does that make sense?
Chief, how many of those uplights did we lose to thievery? Because we had those uplights in the trees down on the 900 block were really cool until they got liberated.
I think we lost 6.
That where the light shined up in different
Oh, it
colors.
was so pretty. I mean, it really, I actually like that uplight better than I did the single strand of, kind of swooping.
The funny thing is you can't use them without the remote, so
Um,
whoever got them
Can't use
can't
them.
use them.
But they got them.
Yeah, they got them.
I bet if you check eBay, they'd be real cheap.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see if we keep buying back.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll try to work out the considerations. And if we can, we'll go ahead and order option 3.
So again, let's reiterate, what we're gonna do from Melody Square with that, we're gonna try to do the same kind of wreath theme to the end of
None.
From 9th to 10th.
9th to 10th.
Yeah.
Because I think consistency is a pretty good thing to keep up.
Wilson, will we be able to get in touch with Duke Energy to find out if we can put them on these poles in time to buy these by the end of January so we get that 33% discount?
I think so, yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a must.
Yeah.
That would
We're,
really,
they're asking us for some concessions on some projects coming up, so hopefully they'll be willing to give us some concessions on these, but yeah. Crystal's already been in touch with Jimmy Flack, so he knows about it. I think we can get an answer from him.
Anything else on lights?
What does it take to do one of those committees, Wilson, and what would it be called?
Well, so you remember last year when we did the cemetery committee? We didn't get volunteer, I'm afraid, but we can take that charter and just sort of change it around a little bit and use it to establish this new committee, have the board approve it, and start advertising for it. And if we get enough folks willing to volunteer, we'll put it into effect, and we'll assign a staff person, most likely Crystal, to be the liaison to that committee for the board, and we'll start working.
I think this will be easier to fill than the cemetery committee. I really do.
We're a little happier.
I think so
Yeah.
too. Very good point. Very good.
That's good. Yeah, so we'll bring that back to you all for your thumbs up before we launch it.
Anything else? All right, we're going to changes to zoning code to accommodate multifamily development.
Okay.
Mr. Luke.
Yeah, I need to promote Meredith. Excuse me, 1 second. Meredith, can you hear us?
How are you guys?
All right, good. Okay, so in a minute, I'll make her co-host so that she can share her PowerPoint. But just as a reminder, this is a follow-up to an item that the board asked us to consider at the last meeting. We don't think we'll be able to make a decision tonight, but Meredith's going to give an introductory briefing and talk about a couple options and the pros and cons of each one. And we'll ask you all for guidance, and that's what we'll use to do more work. So Meredith, let me make you co-host and give you the floor.
All right, good evening. Let me share this presentation for you all. Give me 1 minute. In your agenda packet, there is a staff report for you that is a little bit more consolidated than this presentation. And there we go. Okay.
Oh, yes, we got paper copies as well.
Perfect. So this is gonna be a high overview of our current situation with multifamily and a few options that I have started pulling together based on very preliminary research. So just a lot of discussion for tonight. Hold on. Okay, so our current conditions we have right now, if you want to build an apartment, is you have to completely rezone the property to a multifamily conditional district. And in zoning terms, a conditional district means essentially both the board and the property owner or the applicant have to agree on these conditions, and they have to be done in writing. And it would be in the middle of a public forum like we are tonight for a public hearing. Rezonings are a 3-month process. They're not guaranteed. It of course is up to the Board of Commissioners to approve or deny a rezoning. So I wanted to bring you 2 case studies that we already have in town. Just you're familiar with them, but you might not realize what they really are and what they entail. So the first one is Sparta Springs. This is a really well designed. It meets all of our zoning ordinance requirements for, design, aesthetics, architecture, landscaping, parking. So this is a true, multi-family apartment complex that is situated off of Highway 18. This was done back in 2015. This, of course, is an old aerial image, but you can see it's a quite large piece of property, and they're only utilizing the front half, as this property is also within our watershed, which limits, how much density you can build on a property. So with a rezoning process like this, the planning board and the Board of Commissioners would be reviewing a site plan with this rezoning. So the board would be looking at a document like what you see on your screen or in the packet of a site design with the parking spaces, if there's like a clubhouse or a playground, and then of course the units. So you would be putting on a technical hat to review this item. Again, landscaping plan to make sure it would, and of course staff would review this prior and give you, yes, it meets our requirements or no. So of course it would meet the baseline requirements, and then the discussion between the board and the applicant would be if they want more landscaping or the parking to be different or a building to be moved here or there. Those are some of the conditions you could put on this kind of project. At the end of it, what you have is an actual ordinance. This is an actual zoning district by itself. So it has its own, essentially its own document governing it. It's a separate zoning district than say, a highway business or general business. So staff keeps up with this and make sure they comply with those conditions. The next case study is Key City Condos, the old hosiery mill. This is a very unique situation because this was a pre-existing building versus it being a new build. So as you see, Key City Condos was rezoned in 2008. They actually own some other property up a block over. But in this situation, since it was an existing building, the site plan wasn't as critical as doing some of the other elements. So as you see here, we've got a parking lot improvement before and after, or these are actually renderings of it, sidewalk improvements and other landscaping elements. They've done some balconies with the building and done some beautification with additional landscaping on the parking. And then again, the board would, go through conditions with the property owner and they would do their own ordinance. So for tonight, I wanted to have those 2 projects in your mind so you kind of think of what we already have and, moving forward. And now start thinking about the next direction that the town wants to go in with this. So these are the policy choices that I have just started to look at. With any of these policy choices, we do have to do a text amendment. So we do have to amend our zoning ordinance, which of course planning board does a technical review and then the Board of Commissioners does a final review. All text amendments are a public forum, so we would take comments and make sure that the public has a voice in any changes that we do to the zoning ordinance. The first item, as just a discussion policy choice, is to maybe have multifamily by right, which means an applicant would come in and staff would look at our zoning ordinance and we would go through all of the different requirements and staff would approve the plan. Of course, there's pros and cons with that. And one of the things I will note is with the text amendment, we would hammer out all these details. So then staff would have that governing document to make sure, the plan meets what the board is wanting to see. It's a quicker turnaround process. It's going to be subject to the technical review committee getting together and looking at everything and working with the applicant to get the site correct.
So I want to clarify something on this one that I think is notable and worth, just mentioning again, that under this scenario, the board would get to approve what apartment complexes look like in general, but you wouldn't have the opportunity to comment on specific projects. That would be left up to staff.
On who?
Specific projects.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, so individual sites would be determined by staff review, but the board would have made that decision prior that we would uphold for all apartments. So good clarifying point. Okay, so another option is we could still do a rezoning, but not have it with conditions. So again, that's that, we're not getting into the weeds of having to have a site plan, having to have, multiple boards review the site plan. We would still go through a rezoning process, which, of course, gives all of the public, input on individual sites. But the site plan would be off the table. And that would be, again, a staff review versus going before the board. Again, there's pros and cons of both of these. There's still a 3-month process. And the board cannot put conditions on this rezoning process. It's just a straight rezoning. Another option that is really popular with a lot of our neighboring municipalities that I've started researching are special use permits. Special use permit is done by the Board of Adjustment. This is a quasi judicial process, so it's a completely different review situation. Again, a site plan, architectural plans would be needed. It is a quicker turnaround time with a month or two, and it still gives your adjacent property owners a voice. But we're still getting a site plan, and we're going to have a complex review process with quasi judicial hearings. The last thing is a combination. We could pick and choose and get creative with how we want to look at everything. These are just some really quick ideas I've started thinking about. You could have it where if it's adjacent to a residential property, we would still do the full rezoning with conditions, but maybe we let it be by right in our commercial districts that are not next to a residential property. If we can have a discussion on if there's so many units and it gets really dense, maybe we want to have a special use permit. Or if it's, in the middle of our downtown, there's a really big lot just happens to be available. We might want it to have a special use permit process. Or we might start looking at smaller scale projects within our neighborhoods and see, if you're doing less than 6 units, maybe that would be permitted, like a small. One of the ones that's not multifamily, but makes me think of, I think it's Trogdon, and there's a little apartment complex. There's like 2 buildings. And, something like that, small scale, could be permitted by right within neighborhoods. And then, of course, any others that we start thinking about. So what I've done so far is we have a listserv. I've polled the state. These are the municipalities or counties that have responded with their ordinances. I started doing research on adjacent municipalities in the region. So I've started collecting all that data. I just haven't crunched it yet. But tonight, I want to get feedback from the board, and then we'll start researching and looking at the next directions to go forward with this project. So what questions do you guys have?
Yes, sir, please.
All right. Since this is kind of my little project that I brought before the board, some of my thoughts are, and I've spoken with some others. I personally favor the permitted by right methodology with staff approval. Now, Meredith made a very valid point, and I've also spoken with, well, just to be honest with you, I've spoken with Mr. Shepherd about it, that right now the process is a little onerous as far as bogging down and creating burden on a developer looking at growing in North Wilkesboro. Now, this is strictly talking about multifamily within 3 districts that we're general business, highway business, and our overlay districts. So what we're really looking at here is trying to encourage growth in that aspect. Speaking with Mr. Shepherd about it, and I will just speak candidly, I said, Neil, you know, I favor the permitted by right, but I also understand that in certain districts that are adjacent to like single family and certain multifamily districts, residential districts, that there would need to be, those people would need to have some type of voice. So I think if we could do the hybrid methodology that Meredith was speaking about, you know, permit by right, but if it's adjacent or with, to, you know, residential districts, and these are all nuts and bolts that could be hammered out, you know, to fine tune these. We could actually speak to developers and see exactly what would be fair. We would also need to have our legal, to make sure that what we're doing is in no way considered nefarious or discriminatory. But I'd like to see permitted by right, staff approval, and then give the staff the absolute black and white guidelines that they can use to approve these projects in these 3 districts.
Great points, Mr. Parsons.
And just, it's just a process too. We can't make a decision tonight. This is just guidelines, you know, to get started in the process.
I like what Commissioner Parsons is saying. I think that sounds like a good direction to take.
Excuse me, Commissioner Parsons, can I ask a clarifying question? So
Yes.
you alluded to the hybrid approach, but then the last comment sort of suggested that you were back on the by right. So
No, I said, Meredith was talking about in her thing here, the hybrid, where I think she even mentioned it in her presentation, that you could do the permitted by right, but you could really kind of tie staff's approval process to a set of guidelines. We hammered that out. So let's just throw something on the table. Down the end of Main Street, block 46. There's not any residential around block 46. It does not abut any residential at all. So therefore, permit by right.
pure by right.
That's okay. But let's say Second Street Hill, where the old worm factory or whatever that was, up there across from the Wilco station. That property actually backs up. It does back up to residential, doesn't it, Meredith? Doesn't it in Colonial Heights kind of back in that somewhere?
Yes, and we could look at that distinction.
So, you know, and the thing is that when you're doing something like that, you know, because it would be adjacent to single family or R10, is that multifamily R10, Meredith?
It's
What
fine.
is it, R and R? Whatever our residential zoning. Maybe make it so that I'd like the people that if a 50-unit complex was going to be built on top of them, that they would have a voice. But down here at block 46, just let it go. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Just create very specific guidelines depending on location of residential, you know, or, I mean, those are just details, you know, that's just kind of brainstorming there, but that's kind of where I was thinking. And like I said, Mr. Shepherd, who kind of is the one that brought all this to my attention, he said, yeah, if I had a house, I don't know that I would not want to have a say if somebody was about to build a great big apartment complex right on top of it, you know, so that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone have anything else? We'll move on then to the next item. So, Mr. Paulson, selection of Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thanks, Meredith.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll be back soon with more.
Actually, I'm not exactly sure, if I'm the one to do this, but it has been tradition in this town, and I spoke with Commissioner Hall. It's been tradition in this town that upon the completion of a election process, that a new mayor pro tem is always selected. That process has always been by virtue of the highest vote getter within that election cycle. So at this time, Otis Church, Commissioner Church was the highest vote getter in the last election cycle. So is it appropriate for me to make a motion? So I would like to make a motion that Commissioner Church be named Mayor Pro Tem for the upcoming next 2 years or until the next election cycle.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Do I have a second? Yeah, Mr. Hall.
I have.
So now we'll roll call for the vote. Mr. Church. That don't matter to me. Mr. Hall. Ms. Parsons. Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Ms. Day.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Congratulations, Otis.
Thank you. You want
Worked hard,
Oh,
Otis.
yeah.
Congratulations.
You earned it.
You got the. All right, we got a document to pass out for the next item, the workforce resolution.
This next item we got, that's mine, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When I was appointed to the High Council, I went up there. The Workforce Development Board of Alliance, the state of North Carolina is in the process of doing a study to realign the Workforce Development Board. The High Council feels like that they do not need to realign. They want to realign it because they feel like it'd be more streamlined. And they're going to cut out, right now, there's 23 units within the, and they want to cut it to 8. So all these people working these offices are going to get laid off, unemployment. So what the High Council's asked us to do is to tell the state government, we don't need to change nothing. We need to stay just like we are. And that's what they want us to send them a resolution. And if you read the resolution, that's what it says in a nutshell.
Mr. Church, this would, adoption of this resolution would keep things the same.
That's what they're asking for, but that don't mean it will happen. All we're telling the state is that we don't agree with your research. Now, I talked to Mr. Wilson today, and when they get the new research in, I'm gonna bring him a copy of it so we can read it.
Okay.
And they should have a copy of it sometime in February when the next meeting, we don't have a meeting in January. I think the next one is the 19th or somewhere on in February. If they have it available, I will get us a copy of it. But they don't feel like the guy who's in charge of this whole program, he was there asking us to do this because he feels like that the state is trying just to cut out jobs and realign. They say it's going to be more streamlined and all that, but nobody there believes it.
So there's no action required on this tonight.
Well,
The
yes.
only thing I want you to do is for the town rules, whisper and the mayor sign it and send it back to the girl at High Country.
We need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we adopt this as written.
In a second.
I'll second that.
All those in favor, Mr. Church.
Aye.
Mr. Hall. Ms. Day.
Aye.
Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Resolution carries.
Will you send this to?
We will add our appropriate names and so forth and have the mayor sign it. And send it to Todd.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
that's
fine. High Country. I appreciate everybody's help on that.
There's a lot of smart people that we probably need to keep around.
Well, I tell you what, I've had out of place like that.
I'm sure you're smart.
I'm learning.
You're smart.
Okay, that brings us to emerging issues.
Tired, they don't. I don't have it. All right, I'm assuming that there are no working issues for tonight. Are we gonna need to close session?
Yes, sir. Just the first, the top motion, please, on the closed session. Thank you. And if we can take a quick break so I can boot everyone off who's not supposed to be there, I'd appreciate it.
I'm gonna make the motion for the closed session. I make a motion that we conduct a closed session according to General Statute 143-218.11, subsection A, subsection 3, to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, which privilege is hereby acknowledged.
I second. Mr. Paul. Aye.
Oh, aye. I didn't hear it.
All right, no problem. And Mr. Church,
Aye.
Mr. Paul, Ms. Dave, Mr. Parsons.
Aye.
Motion carries. We're now in closed session.
Quick break.
Yeah, let's take, well, whatever you need, 5 minutes?
Yeah.